Hey guys, I'm gonna explain UV mapping and light mapping for Unreal. I'm just gonna start with a simple cube, just to show you guys the concepts of UV mapping in 3ds Max. So, just to quickly demonstrate, I've made this cube and I've applied two maps to the cube. Then, so if I've exported this cube, when I bring this cube into Unreal, the cube is automatically having a map generated for its lighting. So when we build, Unreal automatically does all the thinking for a particular element. So it comes up with this error that says that the object has overlapping UVs, and they're overlapping by 83.3%. So I'll just show you what that looks like inside the object viewer. You can see once you've double-clicked one of your static meshes in the content browser, there's a UV display. So what this is doing is it's showing me how the UVs are applied to this object. So what a UV is that it takes this triangle that makes up that portion of the cube and applies whatever image map that sits over this to that section of the mesh, and then it does this triangle to its corresponding triangle. So in this case, what we're seeing is a major the whole cube is being represented on this square. So there are 6 squares that are just stacked up on top of each other. And each square is made of 2 triangles, so there should be 12 polygon triangles representing each one here. What Unreal does is it has a second UV map that it uses to apply shadows. So this particular UV map, or in this case UV channel 0, is applying this material. So if I stick one of my starter content bricks on, this brick map is only drawn to this extent, and so it's only really 3 bricks by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 bricks. So there should be 3 by 6 on each side. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So it's basically the same map applied to every face. But when Unreal is generating shadows, and that happens when you hit the build or build lighting, what it's doing is it's rendering the whole scene as if it were like an animation or a 3D image that's being rendered, and it then works out where shadows need to be applied to an object, and it applies those shadows in a light map very similar to this brick map. But the issue is, if I have a shadow that is cast across the face of this surface, and I'm using a map very much like this one, then that shadow will be repeated again and again and again and again on every face, when we don't want that. So Unreal has an issue when you tell it to have a light map similar to this one. It will say that it's overlapping and that it doesn't work, because it doesn't know which polygon will be on the top of the hierarchy, the one that overrides the rest. So if this isn't in shadow and this is, does this face's shadow replicate over each face? or does the shadowed face replicate? So it gives errors. So what it normally does is it automatically generates another channel where it takes all of the faces and creates an unwrapped UV map. So generally this works fairly well for cubes, but if you've got slightly more complex objects, it stops working. So I've just generated my own light map just to show you that how it doesn't work. And then within the object, if I turn off generate light map and apply my changes, what happens is this first UV channel is the material channel for the UV mapping, and UV channel 1 is the light map. So if I save my changes and I build now with my bad light map UV, it brings up this error: object has overlapping UVs. And you can see the shadow, it's just basically all in shadow, because what's happened is the face that's underneath this floor is in shadow, and it's just applied that shadow to every other face. So it'll be dark. But if I then open up this object again, and I get it to generate light map, and we apply the changes, so we've got this third channel again. Then when I build, I'll still get this error because it is applying, it can see that my, doesn't work. Sorry about this. I believe the light map needs to be specified. Source for light map. So you can see here this is getting 0, which should be this original one. If I set this now to 2, that's now using this UV channel, and it already looks better. So once we build, still getting overlapping UVs because of the material. Still doesn't work. Maybe that's because I haven't saved it. Errors. Let's try re-importing this. Okay, so this is working, and the reason why it was my destination light map index, so that had to be 2. I got that wrong. Either way, I'm going to show you now how you can generate your own light map source, and one that doesn't one that isn't generated by Unreal, because Unreal can get a few things iffy. Like for example, here you can see the light map is generated the polygons too close to each other in the map, and so we're actually getting some bleed. And the way I'm going to do that is using something that you guys looks very similar. So this is just a quick model of one of those townhouse facades in Woolloomooloo. This is made of 3 separate elements, and then the fence is made of 23 elements. So I'm just going to UV map this all up in 3ds Max before it comes in, and so we're going to get rid of this cube. So I've exported that frontage, that veranda, to DWG, and object. And so if you want that, I suggest you just stick with the default settings. But in this case, I want all my objects to be separate, and we're just going to use Unreal's material combination function. So when we have multiple materials applied to this object, they will just come in with their own materials in a single object. So with entity selected, I'll bring this in, and so we're getting all of our separate objects as separate objects, which is perfect. Now, yours might come up as a different color, a different tone to mine. Mine just doesn't apply any materials to this whatsoever. So to bring up your material palette in 3ds Max, it's this little sphere button called Material Editor. This is it. It'll probably look different to mine. Especially a lot of them will appear like so. This material editor is very similar to Grasshopper in terms of it's a visual scripting environment where you can apply various different parameters to a material, just like Unreal's material editor. But for now, I'm going to go to Modes and Compact Material Editor, purely so that it's compact. So UVW maps are basically ways that we apply images to an object. So for example, this wall, if I want to apply a repeating pattern across it, I can use a UVW map. So I know a few of you, or maybe even all of you, haven't used 3ds Max before. So just quickly in this environment, if you can select objects using the select object function, and to get UV mapping on an object in Max, you need to go to the Modifier tab on the right. It's this little blue band with control points on it, and then to apply it, you need to use the drop down, come down to UVW map, and I'm going to talk about these two for this video: UVW map and Unwrap UVW. UVW map will be the first one. It's kind of the basic one. It really does quite primitive functions. So I can apply a UV map across this object, except we really don't have a good understanding of what the UV map looks like on this object. So I'm going to apply this checkerboard material to it, so that we can see. So just a quick rundown of how to make the checkerboard material. If you start with the material if you're using this V-Ray editor under diffuse, if you then under the map select checker, that creates this checker material. A lot of you, if you don't want to use a V-Ray material, if you don't have it installed, etc., once you select your material, select this button here. It will probably say something different than V-Ray material. And then under materials, we're just going to click standard. And then under standard in diffuse, we'll pick checker, and then we can apply that checker material. Now, once you've applied it, it probably won't show you the checker across the object, because you then have to click show shaded material in viewport, and that will then bring up that texture. And you can do that with anything. So for example, if I use the swirl function and apply swirl, and then we show it, then we can then see it applied to that whole object. Let's go back to that checker. So UV mapping, you've got planar, which is effectively, if you can see this orange box, it's like a projected map that goes in one direction. In this case, it's Z. You can quickly change its alignment to X and Y, or you can even play around with a few of its settings, such as fitting it so it fits to the bounding box of the object in that plane. So we go to Z and then fit, it squeezes in. If we move it, so for to move the UV map without moving the object, because if I go to move that or rotate that right now, it rotates the whole thing. You need to click this little black plus under UVW map, and then select the gizmo, and then once that's selected, you can rotate or scale or move the map independent of the object. So for example, if I move this away, just quit out of Skype, we can center it back on the object using center. Bitmap fit only really works if you're using an image instead of this checker. Normal align allows us to pick a surface on our object, and it will align that map to that surface. So this is now sitting on that face. View align aligns to the view that we're looking at. So in this case, if we're viewing this in orthographic mode, which I'll just put it into orthographic mode, the squares on this should come out perfectly aligned to how we're looking at this object. And then we can reset region fit, which basically you can quickly draw in a region. So reset. So those are your manipulators, but then you've got various other types of mapping, and you can also play around with the scaling directly with these numbers. So cylindrical applies the map in a fairly obvious way, in a cylindrical fashion. It's only really useful for cylindrical objects, and I probably won't even bother applying it to these, but these are definitely objects that can take cylindrical mapping. Spherical mapping, yet again, not so useful for this particular geometry, but very useful for spheres or ends that are hemispherical, But in my case, I quite like the box mapping for typical architectural elements. And what it does is, instead of creating a single plane and projecting down, it creates three. So 1, 2, 3. And any face that is relatively the same angle as that particular side of the box will take that type of mapping. So, for example, we can tighten up the mapping across the Y direction of the object while having a huge width and a tight W. Or, in this case, I'm going to set this to 500 millimeters to get a nice uniform grid across the object. And I can even move this now so that I'm getting a fairly nice cap. So, for example, I don't have a thin band where the material repeats. I can just edge it into place. There we go. And let's have that there so that we don't have any split across the top. Brilliant. So I'm going to do that now for the door. UV map. Now, the door probably will only be viewed from one side, so in this case, planar is easier. And we're going to set that to Y, and we'll fit it. So the UV map is now the same size as the door. And so now if we have a door material or bitmap that is a square, but if stretched out to a door size, actually looks like a door, it'll just stretch to that. So, for example, we'll get a stretched door. So this checker box is just 4, and it's stretching out. So I'm going to keep that the way it is, but apply a separate material to it. We'll UV map the slab. This one will probably do a box, and let's do 500 by 500 again. And so that's how the checker sits on it. Maybe we can offset this so that if we are using the same material, it's lining up, or it doesn't line up. So let's make that not line up, just for example's sake, and apply a new material to that. So if we're applying new materials to these things, they'll come in with different material slots in Unreal. And then the last will be these. So I'm just holding Control while I select these, and if you hit Alt, it deselects. So I'll just window drag that in and then deselect these guys. Now the way I want to map these is probably, let's just do a planar map at the moment, because they're so small that we don't really have to worry about them. So we can actually select multiple objects and apply the same map. So I'll just apply this checkerboard material to it so that you can see. Turn off edge faces. So even though they're separate objects, you can apply that map to the whole thing, and so then we've got a split there with the checker and a split down the middle. So we'll give them a map like so. So all this has really done is it's created a material map. It hasn't created that light map. And so the way to generate that secondary light map and not generate it automatically in Unreal, but instead generating it in Max, is by selecting your object, applying an Unwrap UVW, and then before you do anything in the Unwrap UVW, you need to make sure that your map channel is set to 2. It will give you a warning, and you just want to say abandon. So what this is doing is, if I have set this to 1, what it will do is it will overwrite anything that I've done here in this original UV map as it's set to 1. So these two modifiers are both now stacked on the same object, and one will eventually become your light map and the other will be your material map. So to get this to show your light map as a checkerboard across this object, if you change your map channel for the checker, so if we go back to the original material and we go drop into the checker and set that to 2, that'll show you what this UV editor, Unwrap UV, is doing. So if I open up this UV editor, you can see it's taken the whole object as in plan, so, and then it's just stretched it out to a square. So there should be a black square here, which is correct, it's there, a white one, a black one, and a white one. We can actually see the actual map by using this drop down, so black, white, white, black, and there it is applied to the object. So the faces that you can't actually see here, the vertical ones, they're actually there. They're just infinitely thin applied across this map, and they get the stretched out pixel that they're applied to. So if I now change this, if I apply a flatten mapping and just use the default settings, what it's doing is it's taking all the faces, it's finding where there's a fold in the mesh, and it's then creating that unfolded element on a UV map. So now we can see here that this face here is predominantly white. If I move it over the black interface, it stretches in. So what this will do is it's keeping each face separate on the UV map, so that when the light map is generated, it's not causing a problem. So that one is done. So we need to do that now for this one. UV Unwrap UVW, open UV editor. Oh, almost forgot. Change that to map channel 2. Open UV editor. Mapping. So if this is coming up grey, you just need to make sure that you're selecting your polygons. I just hit Control A and then flatten map. So that one's done. The door. And now these guys. I'm just going to see if, yeah, I can use. So what you'll see with these is they'll end up being really bitty in the editor. So there's the tube, and there's the unwrapped tube all the way along. So if we then select these and use flatten mapping, that's every single tube in that whole selection, and so each one now has its own quadrant per breakup. So the reason I'm doing this is so that you'll eventually see that this might give you a bit of a funky shadow. So a few of you might get funky shadows on things, especially that are smooth, and so you'll have to look at a slightly more advanced way of UV mapping to get those shadows to smooth over. So in this case, I'm presuming, unless Unreal does this really well now, but the shadow generated here and here will have a small seam. So we'll just have a look at that when that's done. So that's finished. I'm going to export this to FBX. Unreal import. Yep. And then in Unreal, I've already got it imported, so I just delete that before we bring it in. Import. And we just want to make sure, I'm going to turn off import materials and textures just so that it's not bringing in any of that checkerboard pattern. I've drawn it slightly too big for Unreal, so I'm just scaling it down. And it's quite weird. Unreal used to bring up all these amazing extra bits of information for the FBX import. So here's our object. You can already see the UV mapping effect with these Unreal checkers. So if I apply materials now, so for example, we have a brick door. No, we don't want a brick door. So we have our brick wall. Let's go for a walnut door. So that's that whole walnut texture stretched over the whole thing. I forgot to apply a unique material to the rail, so that's why that's come in with it's brick. So what I can do is I can select those again and just apply a new material, and then we can overwrite that FBX. And then in Unreal, all we have to do is select re-import, and it will bring in that new FBX. It will overwrite the original, but it will keep all the Unreal changes that you've made. So if I apply some more materials, let's have a smooth cobblestone. Nope. Let's make these plated in gold. Yeah. And then that should be our ground. So rock basalt. So you can see now that that's a fairly the gold is putting me off. I'm going to make it stainless. So it's generated a fairly reasonable UV map across this, with the bricks repeating as with light, and if I apply a brick, that same brick material to the ground, you can see that it doesn't line up. So if we do want that to line up now, just applying that same checker material just to see what's going on. What we have to do is hide we have to set this map channel back to 1 so that it's showing us that the material map channel and not the shadow one, and then we can go back and edit this so that it lines up, and we'll just use that same just need to apply that different material again. You can export to FBX, okay, and then when we re-import, those bricks now line up. But it doesn't really matter when I apply this basalt. So, Unreal has probably generated its own UV map for this now. So if I go to UV and go to the channel 1, that's the UV map that I generated originally, and I've just realized a major mistake that I've made, which is that I generated them all separately, so there's going to be all these overlaps, and this is the map that Unreal has generated. So if we change that so that we are using, I feel as if I've just deleted that. Apologies, my hard drive ran out of space as this was recording, so that's why that stopped. So let me just try and work this out. It's been a while since I've done this. So what we'll do is we'll go back to Max. We're going to select these objects and delete the UV maps that we generated for them. And then we're going to select every object and apply a single UV map. We're going to change that to channel 2, abandon, open the UV editor, select everything, and flatten it. Awesome. This should now come in to Unreal. So I'm just going to delete this and import 0.1. There we go. Just looking at the wrong button the whole time. So in this little, under mesh, there should be a little show advanced, and then you want to select turn off generate light map UVs and hit import. And what that should do, so if I just bring this up, we should have, yes, that UV channel and our material channel. So if I just apply these materials quickly again, we've got our brick, no, sorry, I forgot, it's our door, got our brick, a handrail, and my slap. And when I build, we're getting a fairly decent light map applied. So it's not causing any too many issues. This guy is. So, and what that is that split. So I'll try and make another video on how to solve this issue. I won't be able to do it today, but you can see here getting a slight issue in terms of the quality of the map. So if I, with the object selected, change the light map resolution to, let's go 128. Now just remember it has to be a unit of 2, so maybe even we'll go 254. 256. My maths is horrible today. So when we build, this particular object will take a tiny bit longer to generate its lighting. You can see there we've got a much higher resolution shadow map applied. And that's the basic primer on UV mapping for Unreal. There's a few videos online that probably go over this more eloquently than me. And oh, it looks as if that's also fixed up our handrail. So really that was just an issue with the resolution. Awesome. And so check out the videos on YouTube. They definitely go over it better than I do. Obviously there's a few more details that you can start adding to this thing. We can have repeated objects, and they'll just maintain their UV mapping. So just be careful of if they are meant to just sit next to each other, whether or not they start looking exactly the same. Maybe they need a different static mesh with a different UV map, and have fun.